Okay, so hello everyone. I'm Joel. Nice to meet you, everyone. I didn't meet you all this week. You said I should present myself, right, Katrina? So, okay. I was an adjunct lecturer at Stafford University, but unfortunately lost my job this week. I know. Yeah, you can all. Yeah, right. But I do have many more second. I also have a job at Dundee. And I'm also the editor of Technophony as well, which I've been plugging this week, which many people have been edited into, and do check it out. So, okay, I'll get started. The caveat, or what I would like to just preface this by is to say, not for very long, but to say that I did write this last night. So I wrote this in about 5 hours. I applied to a job before that, and then wrote this to about 3 a.m. Got up 7 and then finished it off. So if it's like completely and utterly incoherent, I don't know who to blame. I don't know really. Staffordshire University. Okay, so this is, or it was called an Introduction to Critical Epistemology. It kind of still is that Introduction to Critical Epistemology. It's now as transductive architectonics. So as Nick will know, and some people I've been talking to this week, I am finishing a book that's called Critique of Pure Plasticity, which is a critique of what I call infinite transformation, or the possibility of infinite transformation, infinite change, right? So I'm trying to think in a kind of quasi-Kantian way, what might be the conditions, are the limiting conditions to the notion of transformation or change. Thought both theoretically, which is to say, as I say, for experience, or practically in terms of what can be done as well. So the Kantian questions are, what I can think, or what I can do, or what I can hope for. I change that to what can be thought, what can be done, can be hoped for. Okay, so this might sound a bit Heideggerian at the beginning for some weird reason, but I'm definitely not a Heideggerian. So, okay, let's start. Or a Kantian, as you'll come to see, despite appearances. Okay, it is perhaps a necessary feature of all forms of thinking that sooner or later thinking is led to the question: what are the means by which such a form of thinking thinks? Hence the Heideggerian beginning there. That makes maybe little sense. This is nothing more than saying that modes of thinking, ways of thinking, indeed also modes of doing and acting, come to question the way in which they think and do. There is a reflection with regards to method, odos, the way, through which thought and action come into existence or exist. Theoretical and practical philosophical method, in other words. As such, to reflect on method is as much a reflection on technique. Method is technique. And if method is technique, a way of doing, and if thought follows a technique in its thinking, then thought is as much a doing as it is an acting. In other words, thinking is doing and doing is thinking. This is philosophy. Then thought, in other words, but, and this is the crucial point, there are as many ways to think as there are to do, and by extension, there are as many ways to philosophize as there are philosophies. The conditions of the possibility of thinking are the conditions of the possibility of doing. Then how do I philosophize? What is the method of my philosophy, if indeed it would be at all possible to attach that singular personal pronoun to such a lofty verb? I think not. I hope this will at least become clear in the following discourse, sketched, draft, Entwurf, right, this word that Vera picked up, on method, or perhaps with method. As French anthropologist Louis Gourand, very influential for Stiegler, for Leroy and many of us, writes with regard to the historical development of technique, techne. There are both what he calls technical facts, so physical universal constraints that bound or limit what is possible for technological development, and technical tendencies. Technical tendencies give rise to the plurality of ways of doing. techniques that are contingent on the social historical context in which those techniques are developed, and one would say also economic, of course, in that regard, political economy. A chair made in China during the Ming Dynasty, say the Guan Muavi hat chair, is not a chair from Windsor. It's itself a chair that was developed in my hometown, High Wycombe, a town in which I grew up in on the outskirts of London. The ways of building these chairs are different. Their technical tendencies or techniques differ. But both are chairs, nonetheless. Bound, limited by the technical fact that constrains what it means to say or to judge, to use Kantian language, that they are both chairs, right? With chair here being an empirical concept for those who want to know the logic behind it. The material and physical causes that form a chair, to be Aristotelian for a second, insofar as a chair may support the weight or the gravitational force of whoever or whatever is placed on it, something that would likewise differ on the moon, remain nonetheless the same. When for me, the same is not identity, right? Philosophy is no different, or perhaps more accurately, the technical methods of philosophy are no different. There are, and this will perhaps sound contentious, Thomas earlier in the week said I'm going to piss a lot of people off with my philosophy, but let's see whether this is the case. There are, and this will perhaps sound contentious, both philosophical facts as there are philosophical tendencies. I will come back to this later. It suffices to say that what I mean by this is that there are things that cannot be thought and things that cannot be done, so far as there are things that can be thought and can be done. It is as impossible to practically reverse entropy at a global scale, to move faster than a massless particle through space-time, as it is to experience what Kant called intellectual intuition, my main attack, which I define as immediate, non-sensory, transcendent knowledge that is distinct from both actual empirical perception and virtual abstract reasoning. Direct awareness of fundamental realities, such as the completeness of one's own consciousness, the soul, fundamental spatial temporal truths about existence as it is in itself, the cosmos, or to be at one with God, are impossible for any being endowed with the metastable unity of apperception. With and perhaps against Kant, humans are far from being the only animal endowed with such a capacity. Any desire to transcend from philosophical facts so as to enter into the realm of speculative realities, speculative realism now, is nothing other than a desire to be homo deus. Right? We, whoever we are not and can never be that transcendent God of the Hebraic tradition. The Greeks were right. The sin of man is and always will be hubris, right? Pride. Hubris must be struck down wherever and whenever it raises its speculative head. It is a method that leads to burnt wings. It is in this sense that mythology has always been and will remain philosophical, more than any hooded theology guising itself as wisdom. Nietzsche is a philosopher precisely for this reason. If philosophical method is a technique, then it is a technical method that builds philosophy, a perhaps tautological definition. But what is it? But what does it, philosophizing, build and how? Before I begin to transduce what in Kant is known as the architectonic method, it is worth noting that in speaking of the technical method of philosophy, I do not hold to the strict distinctions between, on the one hand, nature, physis, and artifice, techne on the other. Technical capacity is not the singular domain of the human animal. This would be ridiculous to say such a thing. If techne is taken to mean ways of doing, if technique is method, right, then the non-human animal is as capable of it as humans, both in variety and skill. In other words, building is not an activity solely predicable of the human animal. Perhaps it would be worth asking then, as an aside, right, method, as Benjamin writes, is a detour. Can the non-human animal philosophize? If it cannot at present, who knows, perhaps it can, then there is no reason to logically suspect that it cannot or will not in the future, in the same way that other hominids could. Right? I'll leave this fact to the paleoanthropologists. What is certain, nonetheless, is that in precisely the same way that technical facts already constrain the technical tendencies of non-human animals, right? No human nests travel faster than the speed of light. There is a philosophical fact in experience pertaining to the negative judgment. And this is the negative judgment that holds the whole of the critique, wherever that book is, together. No unconditioned concept, the absolute, no unconditioned concept, can subsume under it an object in experience. This would be as applicable to an octopus philosopher, to that friend that I saw yesterday, as it would be to a human philosopher. The critical limits of reason, practical and theoretical, are universal and necessary regardless of who or what is building a philosophy. Many people get scared by Kant talking about universal and necessary conditions, right? But in this sense, hopefully you can start to see that it's not as straitjacketing as once thought. At the beginning of Kant's transcendental doctrine of method, that which follows the doctrine of the elements as the second book of the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant, the technician of critical philosophy, writes the following. It is worth citing in full, if only then to transduce it into something other. If we look upon the sum of all knowledge of pure speculative reason as an artifice for which we have at least the idea within us, it can be said that in the transcendental doctrine of elements, we have made an estimate of the materials and have determined for what sort of edifice, for what height and strength of building they suffice. We have found indeed that although we had contemplated building a tower that would reach to the heavens, the supply of materials suffices only for a dwelling house, just sufficiently commodious for our business on the level of experience, and just sufficiently high to allow our overlooking it towards beauty, perhaps, and the sublime. The bold undertaking that we had designed, right, the speculative tower of theology, is thus bound to fail through lack of materials, not to mention the Babel of tongues, which inevitably gives rise to disputes among the workers in regard to the plan to be followed, and which must end by scattering them all over the world, leaving each to erect a separate building for himself, according to his own design. At present, however, we are concerned not so much with the materials as with the plan. And in as much as we have been warned not to venture at random upon a blind project, which may be altogether beyond our capacities, and yet cannot well abstain from building a secure home for ourselves, we must plan our building in conformity with the material which is given to us, which is also at the same time appropriate to our needs. Not to say that he's a Marxist there, but no. To philosophize is thus a building not of a chair, but of a dwelling house. Again, maybe Heideggerian. One that does not reach to the heavens, right? As if to sit and converse with that Hebraic God, but one that is sufficiently commodious for our business on the level of experience and just sufficiently high to allow of our overlooking. The dwelling house of philosophy is to be built with those materials that meet the needs of a house that wish to needs of those that wish to dwell in it. It is not a tower, though one was indeed sought to be built. It is not a castle inside of which one is besieged or besieges. It is not a temple in which one is to worship or to be worshipped. As per the technical fact that one cannot build a building higher than the strengths of its materials, the stability of its foundations, and the pressures of the surrounding air, so too philosophy cannot be erected beyond the conditions that make its building possible. To build higher than the philosophical fact, one that I just named, that negative judgment that rational ideas cannot assume an object in experience, that which constitutes the building, right? Again, there is no pretense that the building of the dwelling house of philosophy is, by this very fact, an affair that must oppose upon itself in its building a singular design, right? This is what Kant also says. Right? There is conflict necessarily, right, in design. Right? Conflict is necessary. Kant also says that it is conflict itself that is. He says something like the condition of the maintenance of the body rotting in its. That's another quote. Anyway, huh?
Go on.
Go on. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. But what is the dwelling house, again, that I may be contentiously, the unity of my perception that I take myself to be, whose plans I give freely to you, right? And in which you are to stay, or free to stay. As much as it might appear as though it has been built according to the architectonic plans set up by Kant, right? It is Kantian only insofar as it is critical philosophy that provides the schema with which to build, right? Kant is dead, right? Kant cannot philosophize for me or for us, right? Or for the octopus. Critical philosophy merely teaches us where and where not to build, right? What can and cannot be used for building. It is for this reason that the method of philosophy as a technical mode of thinking is not that of history. I might study and learn as much as I like about its history, right? Those that have built before me. But it is in the building, right, that I become a builder. It is in philosophizing that I become a philosopher. Right? Kant writes, anyone, therefore, who has learnt, in the strict sense of that term, a system of philosophy, such as that of Wolff, right? This is the rationalist that comes before Kant. Although he may have all its principles, explanations, and proofs, together with the formal divisions of the whole body of doctrine in his head, and so to speak, at his fingers' ends, has no more than a complete historical knowledge of the Wolffian philosophy. He knows and judges only what has been given him. To be a historian of philosophy is not to philosophize. Contentious. So for a lot of people with that. This does not, and do not get me wrong, mean that history is in and of itself without value. Right? This is not a value claim. Right? Okay, dancing isn't painting. Right? Well, they're both arts, maybe a bad example. Anyway, furthermore, although they're both types of thinking. Anyway, furthermore, the history of philosophy is not merely imitative, as Kant says. Right? It is productive, right? Or reproductive, you could say. Right? Here Kant is wrong, right? But it does not build, nor does it maintain what is to be properly understood as philosophizing. History is the source from which there can, and this is what Kant says, from which there can also arise criticism, even the rejection of what has been learned. If we are to take Kant at his word and view philosophizing, and Kant says that the architectonics, and you'll see this in a second, is not a preformation, but an epigenetic structure, right? One that does not have in itself, it's not idealism, pure idealism, that sense. It doesn't have an idea which then develops or emerges, right? It's epigenetic, right? It has a relationship to its outside. If you are to take Kant at his word and view philosophizing as epigenetic, a word he uses, right? There's been lots of work on this. Then the history of philosophy is that from which it grows, adapts in function of its environment. To destroy the history of philosophy, which I do not encourage, right, would account to destroying the conditions of possibility of its evolution. But in the same way that the information stored in genomes is not life, right? So simply map out the genomes is not what life is, right? One word is not living, right? It's not dying, it's not evolving, right? History is not philosophy, nor is it philosophizing. It may seem as though I have radically changed analogies here, right? Okay, from the technical architectonic to the natural organic. But as Simondon has shown and cybernetics has demonstrated in acting, right? Such a false distinction between the technical and the organic must and has been undermined. Technical objects, well, this is a Stiglerian term, non-organic organisms, evolve and adapt with regards to environmental, informatic, and selective pressure as much as organic organisms do. That they have evolved through the mediation of what we call animals, right, is as contingent as the fact that certain fig trees can only reproduce through the singular intervention of their corresponding species of wasps. Right? We would not say that a fig tree is living just because it can't reproduce on its own, that it requires mediation through a wasp. Right? Indeed, Kant himself, though he begins his account of architectonics via the analogy of building, relies on the transition to the organic operation of animal growth. Not evolution, but this is where I differ. So as to expand what he understood by philosophy as an organized unity. Let's now look at what Kant means by an organized unity. Let's be historians for a moment. If only then to take flight into some other epigenetic transductive criticism. At the beginning of the Architectonic of Reason, which is the last section of the doctrine of method, just before Kant goes into the history, he writes the following. By an architectonic, I understand the art, right, techne, the art of constructing systems, in the plural. As systematic unity is what first raises ordinary knowledge to the rank of science, that is, makes a system out of a mere aggregate of knowledge, architectonic is the doctrine of the scientific in our knowledge, and therefore necessarily forms part of the doctrine of method. In accordance with reason's legislative prescriptions, our diverse modes of knowledge must not be permitted to be a mere rhapsody, must form a system. Only so they can then further the essential ends of reason. By a system, I understand the unity of the manifold modes of knowledge under one idea. By a system, I understand the unity, this idea is the concept provided by reason of the form of a whole, insofar as the concept determines a priori, not only the scope of its manifold content, but also the positions which the parts occupy relatively to one another. The scientific concept of reason contains, therefore, the end in the form of that whole, which is concurrent with this requirement, unity of the end to which all the parts relate, in the idea of which they all stand in relation to one another, makes it possible for us to determine from our knowledge of the parts whether any be missing, and to prevent any arbitrary addition, or in respect of its completeness, any indeterminateness that does not conform to the limits which are thus determined a priori. The whole is thus an organized unity, he writes, articulatio, not an aggregate. It may grow from within, he says, in intus susceptionem, but not by external addition per apposition, next to each other. It is thus like an animal body, he writes, the growth of which is not by the addition of a new member, but by the rendering of each member stronger and more effective for its purposes. So, this is where things start to change a bit, right? I'm not a Kantian, and there's many things in there which I don't agree with. It is not surprising for Kant, architectonics as the method of Kantian critical philosophy is understood as the art of constructing systems in the plural, right? Philosophy is the building of those houses in which we dwell so as to philosophize, and as I claim, it is precisely philosophizing which does the building and the maintaining. Philosophical architectonics is thus that technical tendency according to which a system is to be built that raises the aggregate materials of experience to the rank of science. I have no problem with calling it a science. But it is, likewise, according to Kant, a system whose unity of the manifold modes of knowledge must be guided by one idea. Right? On the face of it, it is perhaps difficult to square how philosophical architectonics is both the art of constructing systems in the plural, right, each according to their own design, and the art of constructing systems which is guided by one idea. Right? Indeed, what is this idea, right, according to which all systems are to be constructed? Does this not undermine the very plurality inherent in the notion mentioned earlier of philosophical tendencies? Right? In the same way that immediate, non-sensory, transcendent knowledge is not possible, so too is the art of philosophizing dependent on the synthetic nature of the idea of unity as its other philosophical fact. So what might this mean? It is crucial here not to mistake the regulative, immanent idea of unity. Right? Kant is very, very clear on this, right? The ideas are immanent, right? And Deleuze picks this up. That which underlies the condition of synthesis, right? So it underlies this notion with those speculative intellectual intuition, right? Absolute knowledge, Hegel, the unconditioned soul, or the transcendent God. What Kant calls here the concept of a whole, right? Insofar as it determines, he says, a priori, thus it is not empirical, right? Both the scope of its manifold content, but also the positions which the parts occupy relative to one another, is nothing more than saying that philosophizing is conditioned, right? Living in this, I would say here, is also, it's conditioned by the endurance of synthesis over time, right? What Simenon calls being through becoming, right? What might that mean? Insofar as individualized houses, human beings, bricks, and bees constitute individuated systems whose boundaries are, and here perhaps the transduction begins, metastable unities. Philosophizing, right? Philosophy requires the idea of a metastable unity as guide to its building. I build a house with the intent that for as long as I or others might need it, it may give me or them shelter. Right? Thought, in other words, is not just, this is all it means, thought is not just an aggregate of thinking. It's not just, and Kant, he also says this about the unity of our perception. All unity is to say that every moment is not distinct, right? That every time I look at this table, I don't think that it's a different table every single moment. It's just to say that there is endurance through time, some form of endurance through time, right? This is also what Locke calls consciousness, right? Although Locke says it's God that enables that, but in the same way that a house, right, is a home, right? It is not just an aggregate of bricks, right? Or an organized being is not just an aggregate of limbs and organs, right? This is what it means. This is what the idea of unity means, right? Despite the absolute, continuous, and indiscrete nature of what is most probably the world, right? Okay, yeah. Thinking, acting, doing, philosophizing require the als ob, as Kant says, the as if of metastable unity. Right? It is as if this chair is the same through these moments. It is as if I am Joel 10 minutes ago in 10 minutes, right? I'm not, right? But it's as if I am. 3 philosophical facts, in other words, technical constraints, have thus far been determined as those which guide the method at stake, right? This discourse or method, which I name critical epistemology, right? Or transductive architectonics. 1, immediate non-sensory transcendent knowledge of the absolute is not possible. This keeps the method in the realm of philosophy, and sorry to the theologians, not theology, right? Okay. 2, the history of philosophy is not philosophy, right? Insofar as it is not philosophizing, but constitutes the epigenetic source from which it evolves. To simply know how Kant built his system is not to build a system of thought, right? No, this isn't philosophy, right? That book, yeah, this is, right? 3, metastable unity is the condition of synthesis, the endurance of being through becoming. Philosophizing requires that a system is not a mere aggregate of thought or doing or whatever, but functions as if it is individuated, despite endurance of that which constitutes philosophizing. Through these 3 philosophical facts, we come to perhaps the most remarkable paragraph of the opening to the Architectonic of Pure Reason, where, as mentioned above, Kant himself shifts analogical register so as to include into the metaphorical field of architectonics the operations, not just of non-organic organisms, buildings, right, all of that architectural stuff that he's known for, but organic animal bodies, right? Let's read this again. The whole is thus an organized unity and not an aggregate. It may grow from within, right, per intus susceptionem, but not by external addition, right? It is thus like an animal body, the growth of which is not by the addition of a new member, but by the rendering of each member, without stronger and more effective for its purposes. Okay, again, not everything in there, okay, but you see I'm starting to change this, right? It is perhaps here, most crucially, that the transduction from what is usually understood as the Kantian architectonic method of system building towards something other, right? Something transduced takes flight. Metastable unity is the synthesis of being through becoming, right? Sameness over time. Again, sameness is not identity, right? As Kant writes, unity is like an animal body, the growth of which is not by the addition of a new member, but by the rendering of each, member, the building, constructing of each member. Okay, stronger and more effective for its purposes. The distinction is decisive, right, between this intus susceptionem and appositionem, right? Per intus susceptionem, right, in in Enlightenment kind of biology, it's where he also gets epigenesis from, denotes growth from within. But what's this? What is this within? Right? A form of kind of internal, it's not really assimilation, right? But that transforms, right, what is received from outside into the very structure of the organism, right? So it essentially says that that which is the inside, if you will, of the animal body is constituted by the continued integration of that which is outside, right? Architectonics is thus the technical method which grows according to self-organizing metastable unities. It is that method whose inside is its outside, not through the piling of thought, right, but through the integration of the outside into the inside. An integration that changes, right, transforms the very organizing structure of the unity, the metastable unity that comprises philosophizing, philosophy. One might want to ask at this point what it is that I understand by the operation of transduction, right? If this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Why is critical epistemology a transductive architectonics? As Naomi and many of us have spoken about this week, right? Transduction, as per Simondon, is itself transductively developed from out of the work of Simondon on crystal formation. In the second chapter of Individuation, Energy and Form, Simondon writes, there can be different levels of knowledge, just as there can be different degrees of stability of a relation, different degrees of metastability. There can be a type of knowledge that is the most stable for a certain condition, and that which can be the most unstable for a certain condition. Knowledge, right, is thus a thermodynamic system state. It is either metastable and thus systematically maintained as the same through the consumption of energy gradients, or with respect to alteration, can transform in relation to its environmental conditions or its milieu, right? Knowledge may bifurcate with the initial system, the history of philosophy, if you will, history of life, providing the matter for the formation of a new metastable structure that takes shape through its relation to what Simondon calls an introduced or informational germ. Okay. So describing this process, Simondon writes, if a latter modification of conditions, for example, the discovery of a new mathematical relation or objective condition turns up, the old type of knowledge can become metastable with respect to a new type of knowledge. Right? Episteme, right then, right? Knowledge, right? Is that unity whose structure is contingent on the outside that finds itself transduced into the inside. Right? Episteme is a system not just in the strict thermodynamic sense, right, that it must maintain itself energetically as metastable, but it is a system whose building through philosophizing is at once the condition for its transductive transformation. Right? Maybe this is what someone calls individuation, or Derrida might call différence. Philosophical knowledge, right? Philosophical knowledge of epistemology, right, requires not just that it be maintained as the same, right? Just to say that episteme require that they are maintained, right? But that if it is to adapt, grow, it must through necessity transduced into it that which is non-philosophical, which is taken to be non-philosophical, not philosophy. Right? It's just in Kantian terms an infinite judgment. So non-philosophy is like non-mortal, it's not saying it's immortal, right? In other words, here we recognize that if we are to philosophize, if we are to build that dwelling house of philosophy, and one that is appropriate to the needs and purpose of living, which always means at the same time dying, right? Then philosophy can never simply be an applied science, right? Philosophizing is, in other words, always a philosophizing with, not a philosophizing of. It should not assimilate, right? Colonialize, subject, but recognize that the condition of its very continuation through time is a philosophizing with that transforms it so that it may continue to be through becoming, life. If epistemology then is understood as that domain of philosophical knowledge concerned with knowledge, what can be known, then if it is to be philosophical, it should never be simply the account, logos, of belief, right? Whether historical or not. And this returns to my notion of the history of philosophy, right? Epistemology must be critical, right? It must search for the conditions, not just of its energetic maintenance, in what Foucault called episteme, or Kuhn calls paradigms, but it must reshape in accordance with the philosophical facts outlined above the very conditions of the structure of the known to the transduction of the outside into the inside. So here what I understand as episteme, right, as what Foucault calls organizing structures of thought, right, are maintained quite literally energetically, right? Okay. This is not some analogy really here, right? Yeah. This is, I mean, that's what, in a certain sense, the purpose of ideology. Right? Ideology captures episteme and turns it into its own condition of continuation of a certain form of political economic capitalism, if you will, right? It is in this sense that critical epistemology, right, my philosophy, philosophizes what is known as the natural sciences. Right? Indeed, it would be in this way that philosophy philosophizes with all that is non-philosophy. Natural sciences shouldn't necessarily be privileged, right? In Individuations, in Simonon's book, Simonon argues that transduction is an analogical operation. As an analogical operation, it's not one that seeks the relations of identities, right? But that relates similarities of relations. Okay. It is an informatic relation of relations. The epistemological claim of Simonon's book is that the relation of relations is what is substantial. It sounds a bit strange, but it's the relation of relations that produces individuation. It is in this sense, right, that one philosophizes, or I philosophize, with the architectonics of Kant. Kant provides us with the matter to transduce. In epigenetic fashion, Kantian DNA has been reactivated through the need to philosophize the return of speculative false idols whose worship risks to destroy the very conditions of philosophizing, right? The soul in the guise of digital immortality, perpetual growth, capitalist perpetual growth in the guise of cosmic space colonization, the God in the guise of artificial superintelligence, right? These are the three ideas that Kant critiques, right? What is the critique of pure reason? It is an attack on those transcendent ideas, right? Again, while Kantian critical philosophy as a critical epistemology provides the schema for a philosophy of philosophizing that seeks to attack or strike down these hubristic idols wherever and whenever they arise, Kantian architectonics is in itself not adequate to the purpose in and of itself, right? I can't just throw Kant's book, right? The conditions have changed, right? To say so would be just a historian of philosophy. Last paragraph. Kant's architectonics are Newtonian, right? They were transduced with the natural sciences of the Enlightenment, right? So the principles of the critique of pure reason, as Kant outlines in his Prolegomena and in the metaphysical foundations of the natural sciences, are derived or transduced from Newtonian metaphysics, right? And Leibniz physics. Right? If we are to strike down these new idols, right, clothed in what I call the thermo-informatic paradigm, a paradigm that takes information to be the condition for infinite energetic transformation, what I call pure plasticity, then we too must philosophize with thermo-informatics. We must transduce architectonics into a thermo-informatic philosophy that is adequate and whose purpose is to demonstrate how the worship of these false idols is dialectical in the Kantian sense, right? How they are illusions whose actualization in concreto, in actuality, are impossible both theoretically and practically, right? To do so, we must take and view Kantian architectonics as a metastable system into which the thermo-informatic sciences must be placed as the informatic germ that restructures its unity. This is the project of what I call the critique of pure plasticity. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks, Joe. That was fantastic. I'm completely allergic to it, but it was like fantastic. I wish I could eat. I wish I could have. So But what, this at the end of the paper, you're a non-Kantian or skeptical about it's I can buy that, that's. But how does the transduction element and the mention, yes, of course, it's based on Newtonian, and so reflect back on what sounds like much more assertive saying that there are three philosophical facts. Use that word, fact. Matches of facts, I'd say. And you know, of course, facts are they're made up, so to speak. So I suppose to get to the point, and kind of resting on conversation we had earlier on. The Kant that you want to use, the Kant that you is still alive and relevant in this post-Kantian, post-Newtonian world. Is it possibly true, probably true, or absolutely true?
It's a good question. So these facts, right? Okay, I don't take. Yeah, they're certainly not transcendent. No. They're transcendental.
That's just psychologizing data.
No, it's not. Yeah, sure. Okay. But anyway, these facts, right? Interestingly enough, so they are, for me, they are imminent conditions, right? The imminent conditions insofar as if they weren't in place, right? Then philosophizing would be impossible. Doesn't mean that I can point to them, right, and say, well, there is the fact, right? They function as I would call regulative heuristics. They
like a model.
No, like a model. Absolutely, yeah. And as I said, they function through the notion of the as if, right? They function as if they were, if you will. I mean, one might say the same thing about scientific facts. I take them in a kind of very similar sense, right? In the same way, not quite in the same way, but in the same way that science requires particular principles in order for it to function, right? One wouldn't say that those principles are necessarily transcendent. I'll give you a very good example, right? One that I use. It's the cosmological principle, right? So the cosmological principle, as you probably know, the cosmological principle says that essentially that if I do an experiment here, right, if I do an experiment on the moon, right, it's a fair and equal experiment no matter where I am, right? That the laws of nature don't change, right? That principle, of course, is heuristic. It's as if, right? Because I can't do an experiment in every single place all the time, right? Pure positivism in that respect is impossible, right? Pure observation, right? So, but nonetheless, that principle as a heuristic is used in order so that science can continue, so that it can produce something like falsifiability or something that it calls laws, right? But nonetheless, right, they can't be experienced. Right? And in that respect, they are transcendental. They're not transcendent. There's no claim that the cosmological principle, for example, is given by God or is in some other realm, right? It's an axiom from which, if you will, or a principle from which one takes as if it were the case to continue.
And in any possible universe, that would hold.
Well, that's, yeah, I mean, it would do, yeah, exactly, yeah, sure. But I mean, that's speculative thinking. Yeah, we're in this world, John. No, it's important. It's important. No, that's a very important thing to say. No, absolutely. Yeah.
You're saying it's unimaginable, unconceivable, not even unimaginable, unconceivable that there is a universe with a cosmological principle and analogously, hence.
No. The cosmological principle is a guiding principle for doing science.
This universe.
In any universe.
Oh.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is not to say that the universes would be different, right? Yeah, they wouldn't necessarily be different. But how would one conduct science if one wouldn't to hold that principle? Because there would be no means of generalizing from induction, right? There would be no means of experience would be impossible.
I know.
Yeah.
That's the case.
Yeah. But it's not transcendent, is it?
No.
In the same way, for example, that I assume that I am the same yesterday as I am tomorrow, right? Even though I'm not, right? I can say that I did something yesterday, I will do something tomorrow. I'm not a single unity in that respect, right? It's a heuristic principle that guides.
Okay, we could go over.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
This isn't over.
That's fine. That's good. It's good. Thank you, John. Very good. Very good.
Thanks, Joel. That was awesome. That's a lot to think about. There's a lot to chew on. And I'm gonna have to chew, but these are my questions for now. But yeah, to be continued. But these are great. It's like weird. It's such a weird. I always have these like just totally double take moments where I'm like, oh, he's saying that, but is he saying that? And then it's something totally weird. Like you've taken Kant's words and like really changed their meaning to the point where it just produces a cognitive dissonance where I don't know whether to like attack Kant or be like, actually,
Sure.
you know, or like really like, actually, wait, let's hear this out and see where this goes. And it always ends up somewhere crazy and weird, which is I really like it. I really like what you're doing. It's fun, but it's tricky. I think whatever you get responses that are reacting to the Kantian more than to what you're saying. In some ways, if you had dropped all Kant everything, I know what you know, but if you had dropped all that, it might not provoke some of these things. But again,
Who would want that?
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. You said
the key word is tricky.
You're going to piss a lot of people off, Joe.
That's good of you.
It's fun, but it's fine. In some ways, it's great and it's needed. Okay, so the questions, quick one, which was the three infinite plasticity things again. There was capitalism, and I want to say God, and there was one.
Yeah, sorry, the three ideas.
You went through pretty quick. I wanted to hear a bit more. I
mean, the reason why I went through those quite quickly is because this is the introduction that I wrote last night to this book. Now, will be the introduction or the method to this book, right? So, yeah. Anyway, but these three full cycles are the soul, right, in the guise of digital immortality, perpetual growth, right? Capitalist perpetual growth in the guise of cosmic colonialism, expansion, right? And God in the guise of artificial superintelligence. Yeah.
Those are
ASI.
What?
Artificial superintelligence.
Super intelligence.
Yeah. I mean, artificial intelligence is possible. It's here, so it's yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then, to my real kind of question, which was, are there forms of non-human metastability? And I mean, we talked a bit about this, so maybe you already have an inkling of where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
I don't have to say a lot about this, but is it possible? Like, because I like this image of metastability. You mentioned Simon Doe and the crystal, that as that, but that to me was like this moment where I was like, yes, but what about the crystals? Mm-hmm. I mean, they're also metastable. So the question is, if you have this like really wide spectrum of life, and then you have and that's metastable, and then we also have a whole range of metastable, non-living, non-animal things. But then we also have things that aren't just minerals or animals. We have like ecological systems, which are not reducible to those things. Yeah. My point is, like, in ecological systems, atmospheric, a combination of all of these animal, vegetable, mineral types of categories, we have really large systems of metastability. So here's the question. Because it's kind of starting from Kant, I know this might not be your view, but I think people hear this and think, oh, we're talking about humans. And I know we're not. I know we're not talking about humans, but it sounds kind of like we are. And I just want to step back and say, can we think about this metastability, or what you're calling critical philosophy, or something that is actually happening like sort of through us? In other words, that the ecological system is thinking through us. So when we do what we call thinking, this is our little, like, we're a little metastability inside of a larger metastability. And then we think, oh, well, but I can only think my own. But
no, we are the universe thinking itself.
Okay.
That's why I say philosophizing.
Yeah, so like, what is doing the philosophizing? It's tricky because I think you want us to really pay attention to what you're saying. Yeah. That we're just talking about.
It's interesting,
humans doing
sure.
thing more or less. But if you're saying it's actually the cosmos. Or
system. Okay, I didn't get to this bit, but because it's too long. But Kant then moves into the cosmological analogy next, and says that what architectonics is cosmicus concepticus. It's the cosmos creating concepts. So in that respect, and I was writing it last night, I was thinking, fuck, am I trying to make an argument for panpsychism here? Like at the same time, I was like, shit, I hope not. But the fact that non-humans can philosophize is absolutely logically possible, to use a Kantian logical term. Absolutely. That we do, and we are Homo sapiens, right? And that probably other forms of hominids did, right? And other forms is, I mean, sure, why not? Why would we be privileged in that respect? There's actually no reason for that. Using this notion of technical fact and technical tendency, right? I like to say something like, and Laurent kind of says this as well, and this is why Stigler is, in a certain sense, a really bad reader of Laurent, and is completely like anthropocentric in his rereading of Laurent, is that humans aren't, the default of the origin of the humans, according to Stigler, is techniques. We become humans through techniques. Okay. But that's just a tendency that we've ran with. Not even we, right? I don't know how many million years you're better at the paleoanthropology than I am, but tools predate Homo sapiens by a long time. The development of Homo sapiens, right? All it is that we have we've tendentially, right, done this, and this is in a sense closer to maybe what Bergson would say, right? There was a canalisation d'énergie, as Bergson calls it in creative evolution. And as I was writing this, also I was thinking maybe I'm closer to Bergson than I first thought, right? I think philosophizing is just or what we might call thinking, right? It's just a tendency that Homo sapiens do, right? Why would it be impossible for others? No, there's no reason why it wouldn't, I don't think. So that would be answered. That's why I was talking about the octopus, right? Just because we say about the fact that octopus have a different form of intelligence. But for me, right, and then this is where maybe John would still bark at me, is that nonetheless, right, there would be still a philosophical fact. Anything that philosophizes, that thinks, in the same way that anything that technologizes, right, can't reverse entropy, right? In the same way that there are, to a certain extent, these laws, right? I won't call them laws because they're induced through empiricism. That's what we call them. But anyway, whatever, right? Are bound by those technical facts, right? I can't just decide that I will change gravity here because I want. Do you know what I mean? No, I can't just do that, right? And the philosophical facts have the same thing. And the philosophical fact to me is that the absolute cannot be experienced. I don't care who you are, whatever you are that philosophizes, there is no intellectual intuition, right? Nothing, and this is a big claim, right, could fully understand the totality of everything in and of itself. What the hell? I mean, come on. How hubristic could you be? Even to say something else could do that is bonkers, right? Yeah, let's stay within our limits here, right? Yeah. Okay. For me, according to their means, to each according to their needs, right? This is what I'm trying to say.
I'm with you 100%.
Yeah.
Say then that there's like a terrestrial, something like what it means for this planet to think.
Yeah.
To sort of to do its own critical philosophy. And all these little creatures that kind of see the world under that kind of region of I still can't use the word facts. It's just like
I know, absolutely, yeah. But you know what? It's funny this because I agree with you. This is a complicated work, and I wrote this last night, right? So, but it's because I've taken it from Laurent Garand, which he calls facts, right? So there may be some, and I agree with you that it's a tricky word. There may be some terminological differences that I need to adapt in that. But anyway, sorry, don't get it.
Yeah, just the planetary thinking, ecological thinking, and it's like we think through that. That's all right.
Yeah.
Then I will ask my question.
Okay.
I'm guessing the answer will be brief. What would you say to a post-structuralist critique? Say Jordan Butler. Here's your talk.
Yeah.
You speak of the possibility of explaining external reality. That's impossible. We're trapped in our minds, right? And language, etc., etc., etc. So how do you bypass that? Then you would receive the critique of science underpinning, undergirding, defining in a way philosophy. That's the second scene against post-structuralism. How will you deal with this epistemological
sure.
challenge?
I mean, on the first one, what did you say on the first one? That there is a.
We pretend to be able to explain external reality. We can't. It's all constructed.
Right? I would say, firstly, no, I don't have any pretense in any of this to say that we can experience external reality as it is in itself. That's the Kantian claim. And that those are conditioned by both physical and philosophical facts or technical facts, insofar as I can't experience the whole spectrum of light. Right? I can't do that. So I would say, sure. I mean, reality is constructive. So all on board with that. So to that, I would just say, sure, you're a Kantian. And then I would say to the second one, science, right? I would say, okay, that's a more difficult one.
Yeah.
I also don't think that science is a privileged domain either. The reason the book makes it clearer that it's not just leaning on science here, but this is the introduction. The reason why I've turned to this, right, and I think you can do this through lots of other things, right, is because of the problem that I have. That is the problematic that I have, right? Which is to say that, and through the work that I've been doing, is that political economy, or just economics, has adopted a paradigm, a thermoinformatic paradigm, right, from the sciences that philosophy needs to fucking catch up with, right? If we are to understand our enemy here properly, and I mean, and as I said, it's destroying the condition of possibility of philosophizing itself. Like, we need to understand that paradigm shift, and there has been a paradigm shift. And I don't think that paradigms are singular throughout the whole universe, through the whole world. Of course, there are many, right? Here I'm talking about the dominant episteme, which is of the colonial West. So my response to that is that this is practical. I'm doing this on purpose, right? Because we need to understand our enemy, and our enemy are presenting us with these false idols that need striking down, right? And the gods are no longer there to do it. So someone has to.
Also, we are supposed and expected to hate Kant.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone is expected to hate Kant as well.
Oh, this is.
Wait, this is the thing with Kant. That is the thing with the weird thing with Kant. Everyone thinks that the subject. The best thing about Kant.
Love that.
Everyone is like, okay, the subject in Kant, subject Kant. The critique of reason, right, is the critique of the subject. That's what it is. It's to say, oh yeah, you think that you could have a full idea of the I? Good luck, Anyway.
Good luck.
Yeah, well, they should read the dialectic. Everyone just reads the analytic. That's the problem.
Okay. Andrew,
Lucas,
then because
Uh,
yeah.
So, thanks so much for the talk. I apologize because I haven't read Kant recently, so this question, if it's wrong-headed, you can just dismiss
Sure.
it and throw me off and move on. So, the question that I have asking, if I'm understanding this correctly, the transductive transformation, what is not philosophical into the oikos, so to speak, though, like, I'm not calling you Heidegger as an
Yeah.
and the oikos of philosophy denotes the maintenance of unity of an architectonic system of thought. But the unity of that system, as I would understand, and our possibility of even thinking it as such, would be based on the Kantian organon, right? Which, as we know, mean one specific thing, which is not the application of a general logic, or if you mentioned even Kant's critique of dialectic, right? But the application of the transcendental logic just makes the objects of knowledge even
Absolutely.
So there may be, as you said, like an analogical process occurring, this sort of open-ended making of that architectonics. However, as I understand it from your talk, that would always still be downstream from the incorporation of the transcendental logic, or downstream from this sort of organon. So even if the thermoinformatic system that you're talking about can reconstruct the metastability, then it's still necessarily grounded in Kant. And I'm not trying to be
No, absolutely.
and provocative.
No.
It's an easy thing to say, like, oh, okay, Kant, it's the emblem of sufficiency, right? There is a question about sufficiency in here, though, and I want to know how you move.
It's a very good question. So if you had taken the course, or because this isn't outlining the transduction, this is just outlining the method, right? So the book itself, in many crucial respects, departs from Kant, right? So and why does it do that? Because we're no longer in a Newtonian paradigm, right? We cannot stay within that, right? So it's hard to show you without you reading a book, right? Let me take an example. Okay. And here, mate, you might come back and say you're just still relying on Kant, but I think of it as something like this. Okay, so why Kant, right? Practically, Kant offers us maybe the best plan or schema for attacking those particular idols that I've seen. Okay. If one were to just apply Kant to it, it wouldn't work. right? Because they change, they're different, right? Okay. Nonetheless, and I do not hold at all to the idea that the structure or the organon of the Critique of Pure Reason is the only way to philosophize. Not at all. No. What it's useful for me is offering, if you will, the plan of which then I can start to build materials. Okay. So where does this go? So if we look at the table of categories, right? I don't claim that the table of categories, quantity, quality, modality, and quantity, quality, relation, and modality. I don't claim that they are like universally, transcendentally fixed forever. There's no claim about that, right? I say that these are heuristic, again, or what can cause regulative, right, concepts through which one then can assess or analyze or critique the object of critique, which is to say in these lines, the soul, the digital immortality, etc., etc.
Yes.
How can one think quantity, quality, relation, and modality with relation or transductively with thermoinformatics, within which I include thermodynamics, statistical mechanics, information theory, and now I've started to work on, statistical mechanics, statistical mechanics, so classical thermodynamics, statistical mechanics, other forms of system theory, information theory, and now, because I've not finished, but quantum theory as well. I'm looking at the notion of quanta, and particularly quantum field theory. So let's just take the categories for the beginning, right? Okay, so in French historical epistemology, someone called Duhem started to do something similar. He was like, okay, well, how is classical thermodynamics functioning? What are its concepts? What is its structure? This is what Duhem says. What is its structure? And it's a structuralist project. Duhem was the first person to start introducing the notion of structure, right? What is the relation between these concepts? How are they functioning with relation to each other? He started to say, okay, well, energy, the principle of conservation of energy, seems to be functioning as some form of quantitative principle, right? Which cannot in and of itself be experienced, right? This is me pushing into this, insofar as one cannot totalize the energy of the universe. One can't add it all up, right? It's impossible to do that. That would be to enter into metaphysics. This is what Bergson says in Creative Evolution, right? One can't do that. Nonetheless, one and science, and I've just worked on a paper with a physicist on this in terms of how the first law functions regulatively, not constitutively, within science, within particle physics itself, right? One functions, and even within maths, as if there is a totality of energy, as if energy is conserved across the equation, right? Okay, and when it doesn't, you're in shit creek, right? You're like, oh fuck. What's the other one, right? The other, this is the brilliant example, historical example. I was talking about the ultraviolet catastrophe, right? The ultraviolet catastrophe is the historical moment between when Planck quantizes energy for the first time, and we move paradigms to a certain extent. What is wrong in that equation, right? In the equation, that is Rayleigh's laws equation, right? Infinite energy, right? That's what Planck says. Shit, right? If you talk to a physicist and they're like, there's an infinite, they're like, oh fuck, you know? That's what they hate, right? And in a certain sense, they are applying, in a kind of weird way, the critical philosophical fact, right? Yeah. And so if we function as if quantitatively the law of conservation of energy is a heuristic regulative principle that can govern what we understand by qualitative transformation, right? If I take some I don't know, some energy or some matter from outside and I bring it in here, it hasn't disappeared, right? Okay, where would it go? Right. I've moved it. It's magnitudinally transformed place, if you will. Quality, right? This is Emil Meerson. Emil Meerson had that, and this is exactly also what Lambert says as well, the thermodynamicist, right? Entropy is simple, qualitatively speaking, he says, right? What is entropy, right? Entropy, is the way that I take it, is what Kant calls an intensive magnitude, right? An intensive magnitude is one which determines some movement, some gradient between 0 and 1, 1 and 0. Right? It just so happens that the intensive entropic principle, heuristically, right, that guides, right? This is also in science. Okay, you better not try and, what did, I think it was, what's his name, the guy that invented the, Edmonton, the guy that, the guy that invented the arrow of time, what's his name? Anyway, he said something like, sure, prove Einstein wrong, sure, do this, sure, that, but if you try and attack the second law of thermodynamics, good luck to you, you know? like that also is functioning in science as a heuristic regulative principle. Why? Right? Because I can't qualitatively, right, measure the entropy of the universe. Right? I can't do that. To do so would be some transcendent speculative claim, but it functions nonetheless as a regulative principle. Now you can start to say, I do this with all sorts of, you see, this is how I'm using Kant, right? Hopefully that answers maybe the, but yeah, sorry, I kind of went off on one, but yeah.
Yeah, you said that critical epistemology is a transactive architectonics. When you phrase it like translation, the outside into the inside, and obviously the Newtonian concept of relations. So just to understand it better, is there a space for experience into that? Can you do critical epistemology also with experience, or is only a matter of intellect?
No, it's a good question. In a sense, I think that's what experience is. No, not intellect. Sorry, it is the transductive process. Why? Okay. I mean, quite literally, it is. Okay, so I hear something from outside, right? A sound wave, right, is in a particular form of energy, right? It's distributed between the particles bound to each other, right? When that hits my ear, right, those sound waves are quite literally transduced into electrical signals, right? That then go through to the brain, right? In a certain sense, and this is what Michel Serres says actually, that he doesn't use the term transduction, but experience in a sense is this, right? It is this transductive process. And it is the process through which those forms of transduction metastabilize, even in the brain. I mean, now there's some here bits in the book that we have this notion of the metastability of attention or something, whereby you have a kind of energy pattern that is metastabilized in the brain, right, which constitutes, to a certain sense, attention, right? So, in a certain sense, experience is that. That's what it is, you know. So it is the kind of outside being transduced into the inside, right? And if you will, to a certain extent, kind of in relation to evolution, right? It's also kind of what it is as well, you know. Through this inside, right, through this kind of integration, if you will, right, we have a form of epigenetics, we have a form of reaction to the milieu. So yeah, that's I don't know if that makes any sense what I said, but it's yeah.
That was actually almost precise.
Okay, yeah.
Just on transduction.
Yeah.
I did have a question on terminology though, because at one point, when you were using the analogy of an animal body, you used the term assimilation. Yeah. And I was a little, and then you said it's not a form of assimilation, it's integration.
Yeah.
So I was just, I was wondering if you could just clear up how you're using those terms differently.
Absolutely. Assimilation is in Kant. Sorry.
Okay,
yeah. This is where I think lots of people are like, oh, that doesn't sound too good, and then like, like no. This is the starting point, you know. Yeah, no, I wouldn't call it assimilation in that respect. It's not. Yeah, I say a bit later that it should not be a form of assimilation, colonization, or yeah, absolutely.
Gotcha.
Yeah. No, I mean, I mean that's the kind of forced notion of what we might call, cultural assimilation, or any of these notions. Yeah. So no, I wouldn't say that it is that. Yeah. Okay, time for a cigarette. No. Yeah.
Not barking.
Sorry, that was a horrible thing to say. Sorry, as soon as I said that, I was,
Like man, so
Yeah.
shaving your leg. No, because you're so close. Like we talk about tendencies and facts. And I thought you were going to talk about probability.
Yeah.
But to bring it back down, one thing then, what is philosophizing you?
That was my question too, actually.
Yeah.
Just a simple one.
This.
This.
What are we doing? We are building a dwelling house in which to philosophize. This is it. I know it sounds stupid. Time to go back to your joke. This is it, right? Yeah. No, it is. No, I'm saying the joke. I'm saying this is it, right?
It's a joke.
Yeah, no, but this is it, right? Yeah. This maintains it, right? And this is it, right? These are the conditions of it, right? Yeah, absolutely. As I was writing this, I was thinking about this house and like lost my job. All of the departments are going, right? Like it can die, right? it can die. Yeah.